You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. A new study shows the plight of the Earth's biodiversity. Are these quick fixes to save the environment? Come back, you're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The planet is in jeopardy and humans are to blame. That is according to a new UN study which finds the growth in the human population is having a negative impact on the land and seas. Scientists warn it's putting more species on the verge of extinction than ever before. Before we ask our panelists about the reasons behind it, let's take a look at this first.
In the oceans, on land, and in the air, up to 1 million plant and animal species are facing extinction in the coming decades. That's the alarming conclusion from a far-reaching new UN study.
We've lost much of our native forests, much of our native wetlands, and effectively biodiversity needs to be considered as an equally important issue as climate change. It's not just an environmental issue. It is an economic issue, a development issue, a security issue, a social, moral and ethical issue. The time for action clearly is now.
145 authors from 50 countries spent 3 years compiling the report. They conclude that human activity is driving this ecological crisis. Global climate change and pollution, plus deforestation, industrial farming, overfishing and rapid urbanization are damaging or eliminating natural habitats, in turn threatening humanity.
As we lose biodiversity, it threatens human well-being, all the way, as I've said, from food security, water security, energy security. Also, loss of natural resources in some parts of the world can lead to conflict between people, basically. And especially poor people are hurt, and therefore they're most dependent on natural resources.
Environmental activists want action now, and the authors say it's not too late for change on a global scale.
We have not lost the battle, and if given a chance, nature will reconquer its rights and will prevail. And so we really want everyone to feel that they can contribute, that they are part of the solution.
The authors say we will have to make transformative change in how we eat, live, and work to stop the negative impact humans are having on the planet. It will require placing long-term environmental benefits ahead of short-term economic gain.
For more discussion on the biodiversity and nature crisis, we are joined in our Beijing studio Wu Changhua, who's the director at the Professional Association for China's Environment. Welcome to our program. Also, we are joined by Peter Knight, the CEO of WildAid. Well, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Finally, we have Alexander Rekovich, coordinator for post-2020 International Biodiversity Governance at the Institute of Sustainable Development and International Relations. Welcome to the three of you. Want to start by asking you, Mr. Rankovich, exactly what does the report mean to all of us? Is it just a warning that everybody would brush it off for the next 24 hours, or is it really going to be the starting point of real actions?
Well, hopefully it will.
How big is that hope?
It's actually even a big hope for some of the world leaders who have welcomed this report and who were expecting it as an electric shock to launch now a year and a half of very intense international discussions that needs to culminate with the 2020 Biodiversity Conference in China. So Chinese leadership has a very big role to play here. And so this report is, let's say, not surprising for many observers, but it has a lot of qualities, and one of them is to really show where the origins are, the origins of the issue, and where the priorities are. And it shows that over the last decades, the major issues were linked to the extension of agriculture, and especially for meat production and its intensification. So the amount of pesticides have doubled since the 80s, for instance. And this is where we need to start acting in priority now.
This is what we need to start acting. Well, Mr. Knight, hopefully it's not too late to start acting, but even that is becoming a question mark. Are we really start to act according to the crisis being described in this report? Because after all, many of the numbers, as you already pointed out, are already there.
Yes.
It's just this time put them together.
And I think what this report brings out for me is that biodiversity loss is right change as a threat to human survival in the long run. And certainly for some species it's already too late. I was in Africa recently, there are 2 northern white rhino left.
Right.
For some of these species it is too late.
That's happening as we speak.
Absolutely. But there are a lot of things that we can do, a lot of things that the governments of the world can do, and many things that we as individuals can do. And it gets down to, you mentioned human population growth, but it's very much about consumption. It's the rates of consumption that we're consuming meat, we're consuming other products that are really driving this loss. And that's something we can all do individually. Whatever we buy, whatever we consume, we need to be more careful about that.
It is long already, for a long time, that it is not myth that climate change is happening, according to scientists, right?
Absolutely.
However, in politics and in social debates, it is still taking place, whether there is climate change, to what degree there is climate change, and whether the temperature is really changing, whether those species are really being killed as a result of that. So, Ms. Wu, given the precedents we've already seen in the debate of climate change, which now is being an experience of deadlock because some of the biggest powers withdrew from the whole overall discussion. What can we say about the biodiversity? Are you as optimistic as you should be, Ms. Wu?
This is a very difficult situation, very honestly. So on one side, I think scientists are telling us the truth, the facts, raising the awareness, alerting everyone, alarm everyone, time to change. Otherwise, it will be too late, or even on some fronts, it's already too late. On the other side, actually, I have to say we've been acting probably more incrementally, trying to address certain issues here and there. But when you add up everything together, we're not really, catch up or meet up the challenges at all. So what comes out of the report for me very significantly is a transformative change, meaning all the other policy scenarios probably won't work. Won't work meaning sending a very clear signal, it might be a little bit too late. So now, seriously, this is the time for global community, political leaders, business leaders, everyone, to really think about a system change in an integrated manner and reorganize, even redesign how we do our things in the, around in the society.
About that, about the system. Did we have already a system? I mean, if you look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, they have beautiful aspiration over there. But of course, a lot of people are worried whether those are only aspirations rather than realities that can be translated in just 10 years from now. So to you, Mr. Knight, are we lack of goals or lack of action plans, or are we just lack of real actions according to our already many action plans?
I think our generation is unique because we have the scientific information, we have many of the solutions. What we lack is the political will to implement those solutions. And in many cases, as we were talking about, it's about somewhat changing our values. So our values should not be about material wealth, they should be more about the sustainability for the planet.
You tell me how difficult it is to change people's value system.
Very difficult, very difficult. But we're getting a big wake-up call, and we can choose to ignore it or we can act. But the longer we leave it, the more radical those changes have to be. So we talked about meat consumption, the quality of our meat consumption, if we eat less beef, for example, which is particularly destructive, we can still eat chicken and things like that and have it in the mix. We don't all need to go vegan tomorrow, but we need to start as soon as possible making those changes.
But once again, I want to say that, the reality is the alarm clock has been ringing all the time, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes. We heard all of those, but we are not getting up. That is the issue here. And I wonder whether we are really going to get up before our bed really collapse.
Yeah, the one thing I want to add, you asked a very interesting question. See, we've been setting goals globally. But then if you look at before the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, we had the Millennium Development Goals. We failed the whole process. Meaning, on one side, we have the goodwill, right? Politicians, decision makers are putting their commitment on the table, but in reality, we're not delivering them. And that's where we need to ask harder questions and say, wait a second, what does it mean when you commit on paper, put your signature to those goals, but in reality, you're not delivering them? What should be the liabilities there? I think that's part of the question need to be answered.
two things. One is changing habits, whether it's the thinking habits, is the consumption habits, or the kind of lifestyle habits. The other thing is about whether different generations will have totally different choices when it comes to life. For example, the younger generation, according to some, are much more aware of the climate change issue, and therefore they want to be responsible consumers. And that would push for change. But will those factors really becoming the determining one to make the change? That's what we're talking about here. You know, we can always, once again, doing those incremental, as you said, incremental steps rather than instrumental steps. Mr. Rankovic.
Yeah, then, well, there's indeed a lot of hope towards the younger generations. On the meat issue, for instance, in Europe, because of environmental reasons mostly, and also health motivations, in the last 10 years, meat consumption has decreased, especially for the younger generations, for more than 10%. And so change is possible, and a decade is a long time, but still, it's rather short.
But you have to think about global issues. You know, Europe is only one thing. You have mainly developed economies inside the European continent. But if you look at the developing countries and emerging economies, the change of the diet, we're not saying they are consuming meat and beef in the horrific amount, but rather when the life is improving, people have more protein. It's just a matter of fact. And people want to have better and stronger lives. So what we are seeing is we are at different development stages. Will characteristics of one place certainly likely to be the one and the lifestyle adopted by the other? That's a big question mark.
But I think you made a mistake there where you talked about better lives with consuming more meat. I think the scientific evidence is that a lower meat diet, a balanced diet, is way more healthy than a high meat diet. So the aspirations are wrong. We're not aspiring to the healthiest and most environmental diet. We're aspiring to an old myth that you have to eat large quantities of meat to be strong. And that's
you are having an assumption that you have to eat a large quantity of meat. I'm not talking about large quantity of meat. I'm just saying developing countries' population catching up with their amount of protein that they should take. But rather, at the current stage and the earlier times, they will not be able even to afford it. So this is a global situation that we are looking at. We are at a transition. So how to think really globally? That is the issue here, not just one continent, not just developed world.
I still want to add one point actually to the protein, to the diet part actually. I think the message, again, I totally agree with Peter. I think the message should be actually, you know, why we're eating stuff, because we want to maintain a healthy life, right? And even look at the China experience, you know, when we were a little younger, there weren't enough actually meat or protein, whatever, beef, barely actually. But somehow we ate sort of maize, corn, whatever, stuff like that. Then, of course, we open up, people getting rich, eat more meat. Then the healthy issues, the challenges become even more so, right? Today, we have to deal with that sort of cost. So people...
We have to deal with different kinds of health issues.
Yes,
rather
that's
than
true.
an increasing number is different.
And the meat, red meat, actually is a one major cause of that for the current stage there. But in the meantime, actually, say, for developing countries, it doesn't mean they need to consume more meat or whatever, you know, set that as a criteria for the living standard or whatever. But if you can provide alternatives, protein made from other stuff, like, you know, soybeans or, you know, fish and, all the, you know, white meat or whatever, and it's better. It doesn't mean developing countries also need to go through the curve by consuming more beef actually before.
And that is only one of those steps that countries and nations have to take together in order to help with the problems that we're having right now with our biodiversity, deforestation, as they say. But one issue of meat certainly is not going to solve the problem. So there has to be all kinds of front and battlegrounds we have to fight all together. But are we in the mood to fight in a joint way? That probably is a more difficult question than just the meat itself.
We're talking to someone who is now a US citizen, and I can tell you that in our country it's been very depressing. We've moved backwards. You know, for me personally, when President Xi and President Obama made the climate commitments, I thought we were on the way to a positive future, and we seem to have gone backwards. So I think you have a big point here. Right now, the world in many places in political turmoil, it's not looking forward to the future.
Right. We have very limited time, as we have very limited solutions, or probably actions according to the real solutions. Every one of you, 20 seconds if you can. What do you see as the immediate actions we can take with, and also bring everyone with us? Let's start with Mr. Rankovich.
Well, I think what we need is some champion countries and champion people in the private sector, people who can influence the debate to actually take commitments on these priorities, and especially on the diets.
Champions and role models. What about for you?
As individuals, it's about our consumption. What we consume is how we impact the world. If we can all think more about that in a positive way, then that can make some change.
Be responsible individuals.
Yes.
Last but not least.
I want to add, from China's side, I feel very hopeful that China is expected to take the leadership and as one of the champions and role models actually to lead the world towards a sustainable future.
Absolutely.
All right. For now, I want to thank the three of you for shedding some light and hope on this mind-boggling issue of biodiversity. Thank you so much, Wu Changhua, Peter Knight, and Alexander Rankovich. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world.